So I want to give you a couple tips about topsoil. As a landscaper, if you're new with dealing with topsoil, it can get very frustrating and expensive quickly. First of all, disclaimer, I don't do massive grading jobs or anything like that. If I'm talking topsoil, it's anywhere from 1 to 20 yards. But even if something as small as 8 to 10 yards of topsoil can put a real monkey wrench into your landscaping job and be very frustrating and cost you a lot of time, energy, and money. Here's why. Number one, if you're new to topsoil and you have more topsoil than you're comfortable with working with your first time, from what I've learned, a yard of topsoil will cover 100 square feet at 3 inches, or about a parking space at like just 2 inches. That's a yard of topsoil, 1 cubic yard. Now, whoever's dumping the topsoil, for instance, we just got 2 yards of topsoil dumped in the dump trailer, and they frickin' put 3.5 yards of topsoil. So my guy was at the landscape dump and supply, and he messaged me, he's like, yo, Kalfas, I'm about to go to the job site, but this seems like more topsoil than what we need. He sends me a picture, we get on video chat, I'm like, whoa, don't leave the landscape supply. Dude, they loaded us up like 3.5, maybe 4 yards of topsoil. I was like, dude, don't go anywhere, don't even, you need to get rid of half of that topsoil. Because here's the thing, whoever is at whatever landscape supply dumping your topsoil,
whoever's dumping your topsoil, depending on what mood they're in or how they measure at that landscape supply, you might get totally
incongruent amounts of topsoil every single time you get topsoil. So number one is, if you're dealing with a amount that's more than you're comfortable with, I think that there's some people watching this that deal with 100 yards of topsoil and you're very experienced. But if you're new to it, here's why. Because it's so freaking heavy, and it's so heavy, the material, and it's so hard to get rid of. If you don't own big dump trailers or dingos or machines, and you can't get rid of the stuff, if you get too much, they could put a whole jackknife in your situation, and now you are stuck dealing with pretty much a very stressful situation where you might have to spend hours or an entire day just shoveling, getting rid of, and paying to dump some topsoil that you didn't even need. And now I've been through it. So you should get like the first half. So if you need, let's say you need 10 yards, order 5 yards, get it delivered, install that 5 yards, and take a look at what you're doing and be like, all right, we didn't need another 5 yards. We only need 3 more yards. The saying, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. The reverse is true to me with topsoil. I'd rather get too little and have to go get a little bit more than get way too much, and now you're stuck with all this topsoil. Experienced landscapers in the comments, let me know below. Tip number 2, if you're doing like a whole backyard grade around a pool and installing sod and stuff like that, typically you would put about 2 inches of topsoil, fresh black screened topsoil, which is recycled composted leaf. It's different than fill dirt or sand or something like that. Actually, that would be tip number 2. Make sure you're actually getting topsoil. Here, I'll show you topsoil right now. Look at this. Oh, look at the doggy. He's a good boy. He's a good doggy. Okay, customer's dog. Very nice dog. Look at this nice black screened, rich, recycled composted leaves. That's really good topsoil.
Good topsoil.
There's a difference between topsoil and fill dirt. Fill dirt is going to have chunks of clay and rocks and other organic matter, and maybe even chunks of concrete in it. And then you have something else that would be like sand. But there's 2 different grades of topsoil. One is it's like a gray sandy mixture. It looks more like dirt, like just straight up. You're like, that looks like dirt that I would see in a field. You don't want that stuff. You want topsoil, which is nice screened. So make sure that when you order it, or if you have it delivered, you want to, before you have this topsoil dumped on a customer's property or out in the apron of their driveway, you say stop, and you're going to want to look inside of the truck if you're getting it delivered, right? If you're picking it up, of course you're going to see it, but you want to inspect it. Always inspect what you expect. Make sure that the product that you're about to get dumped is the product you actually wanted. Because even if you're like, oh, that's not what I wanted, and you make a mistake and you got to send it back, and it costs you money, it's going to cost you a lot less than having it dumped, right? So make sure it's that nice screened is the key word. I want screened topsoil, okay? And then tip number 3 is topsoil on a budget. Now, if you're doing a whole grade around a whole backyard, like I was saying, you might need like 15, 20, 30 yards of topsoil. It's hard to estimate that. There is a topsoil calculator online. You can just look up topsoil calculator. You want to get a measuring wheel, go around, measure the property. This isn't a video about measuring, but you're going to want to measure and figure out how much topsoil you need, but then do it on a budget. So tell the customer, it could be like, you know, we could need 20 yards, we might need 30 yards. I can't tell at this point between, let me know in the comments below, but be like, we might need an extra 10 yards of topsoil. So I'm going to have a budget for you between 20 and 30 yards of topsoil, right? You might be able to get it within 5 yards, but then let the customer know, hey, we might not even need to use this entire budget. But I learned this from a landscaper who does like $100,000 landscape installs all the time, and they do huge stuff. He taught me about topsoil on a budget. I actually have not had to use the topsoil on a budget method because we don't do monster jobs that require that type of topsoil, but that's just for, but still topsoil on a budget. Let yourself know within your own business, like when you're quoting it, if you think you need 6 yards of topsoil and you might end up needing like 8, just be mindful of that and make sure you quote it accordingly, so you have a little bit of pad and a little bit of cushion room, because it's very costly to go get and pay for materials, right? I've been very embarrassed before, and I've had to knock on a customer's. When I first got started, I would never ever do this now, but I was scared and practically broke, and I've knocked on a customer's door and been that guy. I'd be like, hey, I'm really sorry, I'm really embarrassed right now, I accidentally underquoted the amount of topsoil or decorative stone that you need. Please, I'll make you a deal. If you just pay for the materials, we'll install the rest of it for free, but we're 4 yards short. And the customers have always been like, okay, I totally understand, and it's okay, do it. And then they were still very, very happy, but I got lucky, right? You don't ever want to be in that position. And the reason I made that mistake is because we were installing decorative stone and topsoil on garden beds that were curved, like kidney shaped, but also curved like a radius, like a what's the word? Like a berm, right? So when you have a berm, even though the square footage of the bed looks the same, it's actually more, because when it berms up, just think about if you take a mountain and you press it flat, it's way bigger than just the perimeter of it because it's going up. I didn't understand that. So if you're in landscaping on berms, you have actually more square footage, right? So those are some tips with topsoil. My guy Kyle right now, see how he's grading it nice and flat in the low area where there's water pooling. Then we're gonna do grass seed and hay over it. Whenever we do grass seed jobs, I bring garden hoses and watering wands with us, 2 of them, and I hook them up and I just quote it into the job, and I just give it to the customer with a set of watering instructions, and I'll be like, here you go. If they don't want to keep the watering wand, I just take it back, but it's like, you know, 25 bucks to get it at Lowe's or whatever, and then just leave it with the customer. So you have created like an insurance policy that water that you've done everything within your knowledge and power and ability, because I can't warranty grass seed, but that's a totally different topic for a different video. What else? Oh yeah, the last thing is topsoil is very deceiving. How quickly it spreads and how quickly it compacts. You might get your first big job and it's like 15 grand or something, and you think you need 8 yards of topsoil, right? And then you get into the job and you realize you needed like 20 yards of topsoil, and you're like, oh my God. So that's why I think it's best to start out small if you want to do topsoil. And then, oh yeah, here's my last thing with topsoil. This is like the best. If it's a yard of topsoil, we do it by hand. And normally I used to charge $100 per yard of topsoil. Mulch is $150 per yard installed. That means we actually go get the mulch and we install it in the garden beds for $150 per yard. So 10 yards would be $1,500. Anything over 10 yards, they get a discount, $145, $125 per yard, depending on how many plants are in the garden beds and how much space. But with topsoil, the first yard is $300 just to get the yard there, because the time and travel and everything it takes. But the second yard, anything over 1 yard requires a machine on the property, which is a dingo or a ditch witch or some type of loader or something to help you, because topsoil is so heavy and it takes so long to shovel it. If you've got a crew of guys or a crew of people that can move it in a small area, I mean, you can move 4 to 6 maybe 7 or 8 yards of topsoil by hand. I'm telling you, if the sun's beating on you and you're doing it all day, wheeling wheelbarrows of topsoil, because you'll find out how hard and how heavy it is. You're going to want a machine on the job site, so I charge a $400 machine fee to have a machine on the job site, and then I'll go pick up a dingo from the rental center because I only need it a few times a year for my business anyways, and then I get the machine. Oh my god, the machine picks up the topsoil, dumps it, spreads it, grades it, and the guys just have to go behind by hand and just make it perfectly flat and graded and properly pitched. But the machine does 90% of the work for you, so if you're ever dealing with a heavy material like topsoil yards, you're probably going to want a machine on the job site, or you'll learn a lesson the hard way like I have. And if you have employees, they won't hate you for doing so. So, all right, we're going to keep moving forward here, and I just wanted to share that with you. What were we saying? We're looking at the Exmark 48-inch radius mower, and we're actually going to make a video with it. What were you saying?
Well, I was saying, if you want to preserve, this is a method that I found that works very well for me, even when I'm refurbing a machine. But if you want to preserve anything on the machine, as far as like the paint, recondition the plastics, keep them from like fading, cracking, dry rotting, anything along those lines, use PB Blaster. Hose the whole thing down, wipe it off.
Wait, you're saying put PB Blaster directly on the machine?
Hose the whole thing down, wipe it
the
down.
whole thing?
Yeah.
Why?
It removes oxidation off of the paint. It removes grime, grease. It's an awesome degreaser. It wipes off extremely easy. There's nothing I haven't seen that thing actually leave behind. So it's like, it's easy. Just
you're enthusiastic about mechanics is amazing.